This story is titled, Trusted My Best Friend to Help with My Wife's Suspicious Behavior, only to discover he was the one I shouldn't trust. Hey everyone, I just wanted to share something real with you. The channel's been slowing down a bit recently, and honestly, I put a lot of time and effort into finding these stories to keep bringing you the best content. If you enjoy what I do, it would mean the world if you hit that subscribe button. Your support really makes all the difference and keeps this journey going strong. Thanks so much for being here with me. Now let's start the video. OP starts by saying, looking back, I guess you could say I was blinded by love, but at the time, everything felt perfect. About 25 years ago, I met Mary. From the moment I laid eyes on her, I felt like I'd found the woman of my dreams. She had this way of making everyone in the room feel like they were the most important person in her world. I wasn't immune to it. She was funny, intelligent, and absolutely gorgeous. I couldn't believe someone like her would even give me the time of day. What really sealed the deal for me was how effortlessly we connected. We clicked over shared values, humor, and even some hobbies. I've always been a big fan of outdoor activities like scuba diving and fishing, and while Mary didn't have any experience with either, she was willing to give them a shot. That alone meant the world to me. It wasn't just about her trying new things for me, it was the way she'd light up when I talked about the things I was passionate about. It made me think we were building something real. For the first year of our relationship, it was like we were in our own little bubble. We spent almost every free moment together, going out to restaurants, exploring new places, or just staying in and binge-watching movies. Everything felt natural. My friends told me how lucky I was to have found someone like her. They weren't wrong, or at least, that's what I thought at the time. After about a year of dating, it just made sense for us to start spending more time at her place. I still technically had my own apartment, but it became more of a storage unit for my stuff than a place I actually lived. I spent most of my nights at her apartment, and honestly, I didn't mind. It felt good to share a space with her, to wake up next to her and make breakfast together. Every moment with her felt like a step closer to the life I'd always dreamed of. I even started thinking about proposing. But as the months went on, little things started to change. At first, it was subtle. Mary seemed distracted during conversations, like her mind was somewhere else. She stopped laughing at my jokes the way she used to, and our physical connection wasn't the same. I tried to tell myself that every relationship has its ups and downs. Maybe she was stressed or dealing with something she didn't want to talk about yet. I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. It wasn't long before the changes became more obvious. She'd pick fights over the dumbest things, like how I folded the laundry or what I wanted to eat for dinner. She started saying she needed more alone time, which she'd never brought up before. And in the bedroom, let's just say the passion that once felt so natural was now practically non-existent. When I tried to bring it up, she brushed me off, saying I was imagining things. "You're just overthinking," she'd say, or "it's all in your head." I didn't want to push too hard and risk making things worse, so I dropped it. Looking back, I can see now that those were the first red flags. But at the time, I couldn't, or maybe I didn't want to, see them for what they were. I loved her, and I didn't want to believe that anything was seriously wrong. I convinced myself that she was just going through a phase, and that things would go back to normal eventually. After all, we'd been so happy before. Why wouldn't we get back to that place? When things got really bad, I turned to my best friend Billy for advice. Billy and I had been close for years. He was the kind of friend who always knew what to say to make you feel better. We'd talk on the phone almost every night, and I'd vent about what was happening with Mary. I told him how distant she'd been and how I was starting to wonder if there was someone else. Billy always reassured me, telling me that I was a great guy and that Mary would be crazy to leave me. "Just give her some space," he'd say, or "maybe she's stressed about something and doesn't know how to talk about it." His advice always seemed reasonable, and I trusted him completely. In hindsight, those conversations with Billy were the most painful part of the whole situation. At the time, though, I had no reason to doubt him. I was grateful to have someone to talk to, someone who seemed to genuinely care about what I was going through. I even shared with him the steps I was taking to figure out what was really going on with Mary. I told him about the times I'd tried to catch her in a lie, or the nights I stayed up late wondering if she was out with someone else. Billy was always there to listen, and I leaned on him more than I probably should have. Despite Billy's advice, things with Mary didn't improve. If anything, they got worse. She became more distant, the fights became more frequent, and I felt like I was walking on eggshells just to keep the peace. I started to feel like a stranger in my own relationship, and no matter what I did, I couldn't seem to fix it. The woman I'd fallen in love with was still there, but it felt like she was slipping further and further away from me. Eventually, I reached a breaking point. I couldn't keep living in this limbo, constantly second-guessing everything and wondering if she was being honest with me. I decided it was time to let go. Around that same time, a job opportunity came up in another city, about 2 hours away. It felt like the perfect excuse to start fresh, so I took it. Leaving Mary behind was one of the hardest decisions I've ever made, but I told myself it was for the best. Leaving Mary behind wasn't something I did lightly. For months, I wrestled with the idea, trying to convince myself that things could still work out between us. But deep down, I knew they couldn't. I couldn't keep living in a relationship where I felt like an afterthought. The opportunity to move 2 hours away came at the perfect time. It was a better job with better pay, and honestly, I needed a change. The hardest part was telling Mary. I expected her to be upset, maybe even angry, but she surprised me. She barely reacted. She didn't cry or beg me to stay. Instead, she just nodded and said something like, "If that's what you need to do, I won't stop you." Her lack of emotion hit me harder than I thought it would. It felt like confirmation that our relationship was truly over. Packing up my life and moving to a new city was bittersweet. On one hand, I was excited about the job and the chance to start over. On the other, I couldn't help but feel like I was running away from something I couldn't fix. I told myself it wasn't running, it was moving forward. That's what I had to believe to keep going. The first few weeks in the new city were a whirlwind. I threw myself into work, trying to distract myself from the emptiness I felt. I made a few new friends, found some great local spots to hang out, and started to feel like I could breathe again. But at night, when everything was quiet, I'd find myself thinking about Mary. I'd wonder if she missed me. Did she regret how things ended? Was she thinking about reaching out? A part of me hoped she would. Despite everything, I still loved her. It wasn't the kind of love that disappears overnight, no matter how much someone hurts you. Months went by, and life slowly started to feel normal again. I stopped checking my phone, hoping for a message from her. I stopped wondering if she'd show up at my door one day, asking for another chance. I told myself that chapter of my life was over, and I needed to focus on the future. And then, one random afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was Mary. At first, I didn't know what to say. Her message was simple. "Hey, I was thinking about you. How are you doing?" My heart felt like it skipped a beat. I stared at the screen for what felt like forever, before finally typing back, "I'm doing well. How about you?" That one message turned into hours of back and forth texting. Over the next few weeks, we started talking on the phone again, just like old times. She told me she'd been thinking about me a lot and regretted how things ended. She said she missed me and wanted to see me. I should have been more cautious, but I wasn't. Hearing her voice, laughing at her jokes, it felt like coming home. It was easy to forget about all the pain and distance when I was talking to her. I told myself that maybe we'd both grown, and that this could be a fresh start. When Mary came to visit, it was like no time had passed. We spent the weekend reminiscing about the good times, exploring the city, and talking about everything that had happened since we'd been apart. She told me she'd been working on herself and realized she'd made mistakes. She said she wanted to make things right. I wanted to believe her. Maybe I was too eager to believe her. I'd missed her so much, and hearing her say she wanted to fix things made me feel like all the hurt had been worth it. By the end of her visit, we decided to give our relationship another shot. Mary moved in with me a few weeks later. She found a job in the city, and we started looking for a nicer place to live together. It felt like a dream. I told myself that this time would be different. This time, we'd make it work. But even as we were planning our future together, there were small moments that made me pause. Like when I'd catch her looking away when I brought up the past, or when she'd change the subject whenever I asked about the things she'd been up to while we were apart. I told myself it didn't matter. What mattered was that we were together now. As we prepared to move into our new apartment, I started going through old stuff to make packing easier. I was excited about this new chapter in our lives and wanted to leave behind anything that didn't feel necessary. Mary said she'd help, but she was busy visiting her family that weekend. I didn't mind. It gave me a chance to sort through my things without distractions. I spent hours digging through old boxes, flipping through notebooks, and tossing out anything I didn't need anymore. That's when I found it. Mary's journal. At first, I didn't think much of it. It was tucked into a pile of old notebooks, and I figured it was just another one of her random things. But something made me stop and open it. I wasn't looking for anything specific. I was just curious. What I found changed everything. Finding Mary's journal felt innocent at first. It was mixed in with a stack of my old notebooks and papers, and I figured it was just one of those random things that gets shuffled around when you live with someone. At first, I didn't think twice about flipping through it. I thought I'd maybe find some old shopping lists, doodles, or notes she'd jotted down about work. But the more I flipped, the more I realized what I was looking at wasn't random notes or harmless musings. It was personal, really personal. I knew I shouldn't be reading it, but something stopped me from closing it. Maybe it was the curiosity, or maybe it was a gut feeling that I couldn't ignore. Either way, I kept reading. The first few entries seemed harmless enough. She'd written about her day, random thoughts, and feelings about work or friends. But then, a few pages in, the tone shifted. The entries became more about me, and not in a good way. She wrote about feeling bored in our relationship, how she felt like I didn't challenge her enough, and how she missed the excitement of being single. Those words stung, but I kept going. And then I found it. The entries about Billy. It wasn't just one or two mentions. It was pages upon pages of graphic details about their affair. She described how it started, where they'd meet, and what they'd do. She didn't hold back. She wrote about their physical connection in ways that made my stomach turn. I won't repeat most of it, but there was one line that stuck with me even after all these years. She described their relationship as wild and thrilling compared to the comfortable and predictable life she had with me. I couldn't breathe. My hands were shaking as I turned the pages, reading about how they'd laugh at me behind my back. She wrote about how Billy knew everything I was doing to try to catch her cheating because I'd unknowingly told him all my suspicions. That realization hit me like a truck. The person I'd trusted the most, the person I'd confided in during one of the hardest times of my life, was the same person stabbing me in the back. I can't describe the pain I felt in that moment. It wasn't just anger or sadness. It was complete devastation. My entire world came crashing down in an instant. I remember feeling physically sick. I ran to the bathroom and threw up, my mind racing with images of the two of them together, laughing at me, betraying me. I went back to the journal, hoping, praying that I'd misunderstood something, that maybe there was some kind of explanation that would make it all make sense. But the more I read, the worse it got. She documented everything. The times they'd met up, the lies she'd told me, even little jokes they'd shared about how clueless I was. One entry stood out more than the rest. She wrote about a barbecue at Billy's house, one I hadn't been invited to, but ended up showing up at anyway. I'd thought it was odd at the time that he'd forgotten to invite me, but when I walked in, everyone acted like nothing was wrong. I stayed for a little while but left because the vibe felt off. In the journal, Mary wrote about how panicked they were when I showed up and how they'd laughed about how oblivious I'd seemed. Reading those words made me feel like the biggest fool in the world. I'd trusted these people, shared my life with them, and they'd been laughing at me the whole time. When I finished reading, I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the journal in disbelief. I didn't cry. I think I was too numb to feel anything other than shock. But as the numbness wore off, the anger set in. I wasn't just angry at Mary or Billy. I was angry at myself for not seeing the signs sooner. All those little moments that had seemed off at the time now made perfect sense. It was like a puzzle falling into place, but instead of feeling satisfied, I felt shattered. The fights Mary picked out of nowhere, the distance she kept, the way Billy had slowly started pulling away from our friendship, all of it was connected, and I'd been too blind to see it. I knew I had to do something, but I wasn't sure what. Part of me wanted to confront Mary right then and there, but she wasn't home. She was still at her parents' place, completely unaware that I'd found her journal. I thought about calling her, but what would I even say? Hey, I read your journal and I know you've been cheating on me with my best friend. It felt too big, too overwhelming to handle over the phone. So instead, I started making a plan. After reading Mary's journal, I knew there was no going back. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the sheer audacity of it all. She didn't just cheat on me, she mocked me in the process. Billy, the guy I'd trusted more than anyone, wasn't just sneaking around with my girlfriend. He was actively using everything I'd told him to cover their tracks. I spent that night pacing around my apartment, trying to figure out what to do. Part of me wanted to call Mary and scream at her, but what good would that do? She was 2 hours away at her parents' house, and I'd already learned that trying to reason with her was pointless. She'd twist my words, turn it back on me, and somehow make herself the victim. By morning, I had a plan. I wasn't just going to confront her. I was going to make sure everyone involved knew exactly what she and Billy had done. First, I made copies of the journal. I didn't want her to have the chance to lie or deny anything. One set went into a folder for myself. Another set went into an envelope marked for Billy's wife. I hadn't thought about her much before this, but she deserved to know the truth just as much as I did. I also made a set for Mary's parents. Then, I started packing up her things. Clothes, toiletries, books, anything that was hers went into boxes and bags. I didn't care about being neat. I wanted her out of my apartment as fast as possible. By the time I was done, I had a pile of her stuff stacked by the door. On top of it, I left a note. Period. You have 24 hours to pick up your things and leave, or I'll call the police. My name is on the lease, and I don't owe you an explanation. Don't contact me. You've already said everything I need to know in your journal. At the very bottom, I added one final line, period. I will never be someone's plan B. After that, I turned off my phone. I knew she'd start blowing it up as soon as she got back, and I didn't want to deal with her excuses. When she returned to the apartment and saw the note, the call started almost immediately. My voicemail filled up with messages. I love you. That was all in the past. You're the love of my life. But I wasn't listening. I didn't care about her crocodile tears or her sudden realization that she'd made a mistake. She didn't regret cheating on me. She regretted getting caught. What really stuck with me were the messages from Billy. He'd been radio silent for months, pulling away from me as things fell apart with Mary. But now he had plenty to say. He tried to justify their actions, claiming it just happened and that it didn't mean anything. He even had the nerve to ask if we could talk things out and move past this. Move past it? He'd been sleeping with my girlfriend while pretending to be my best friend. There was no coming back from that. Over the next few days, the fallout spread further. I sent the copies of the journal to Billy's wife, and the bomb went off. She called me in tears, thanking me for telling her the truth. Apparently, she'd had her own suspicions about Billy for a while but didn't have any proof. Now she did. Mary's parents weren't much better. They tried to call me, begging me not to ruin her reputation. They said things like, she made a mistake, and everyone deserves a second chance. But I wasn't interested in their excuses. She wasn't a teenager who didn't know better. She was a grown woman who made her choices. The rest of our old friend group wasn't exactly helpful either. Some of them reached out to say they'd had no idea, but I wasn't buying it. Looking back, there had been so many times when I felt like something was off. The barbecue at Billy's house, where everyone acted weird when I showed up, the way people had slowly stopped inviting me to group events after I moved, they'd known. Maybe not everyone, but enough of them. I wasn't interested in sticking around to figure out who was loyal and who wasn't. As far as I was concerned, they were all part of the problem. The hardest part was letting go of the anger. Every time I thought I was moving on, I'd replay everything in my head. The journal, the lies, the nights I spent confiding in Billy. It was like a broken record, playing over and over again. One night, I finally broke down. I was sitting alone in my apartment, staring at the pile of Mary's stuff that she still hadn't picked up, and I just lost it. I screamed, punched the wall, and cried harder than I'd ever cried in my life. I wasn't just mourning the loss of a relationship. I was mourning the person I thought Mary was, the life I thought we were building together. But as painful as it was, that moment was also a turning point. I realized I couldn't let her or Billy have any more power over me. They'd already taken enough. I packed up the last of Mary's things, left them outside the apartment, and changed the locks. I blocked her number, deleted every photo of us together, and started focusing on myself for the first time in years. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I wasn't going to let their betrayal define me. The weeks following Mary's eviction were both liberating and incredibly challenging. On the one hand, I finally felt like I could breathe again. No more walking on eggshells, no more pretending everything was okay, no more lies. But on the other hand, I was left with this gaping hole where my relationship with Mary and even my friendship with Billy used to be. I'd blocked Mary's number, deleted her messages, and removed every trace of her from my life, but I couldn't block the memories. They'd hit me at the worst times, when I was brushing my teeth, walking to work, or lying in bed trying to sleep. Little moments we'd shared would creep into my mind, and I'd start questioning everything. Had any of it been real? At first, I felt like I couldn't trust anyone. If Mary and Billy, two people I'd loved and trusted the most, could betray me like this, who else was capable of the same? I started keeping people at arm's length, even new coworkers and acquaintances. I didn't want to get too close to anyone. But as the days turned into weeks, I realized something. I was free. For the first time in months, maybe even years, I wasn't stuck in a toxic relationship. I didn't have to constantly worry about whether Mary was being honest with me or whether Billy was hiding something. I could focus on myself, and that was exactly what I did. I threw myself into my work, taking on extra projects and staying late to prove myself. My boss noticed, and within a few months, I got a promotion. It wasn't just about the money, though. It was about regaining my confidence. After everything that had happened, I needed to feel like I was good at something, like I was worth something. Outside of work, I started picking up hobbies I'd neglected during my relationship with Mary. Scuba diving had always been a passion of mine, but I hadn't gone in years because Mary never felt like it. Now, I didn't have to ask anyone for permission. I joined a local dive club and spent my weekends exploring underwater caves and reefs. It was peaceful, quiet, and exactly what I needed to clear my head. I also started making new friends. At first, it was hard to let people in, but the dive club was full of like-minded folks who didn't come with any of the baggage from my old friend group. Slowly but surely, I started to rebuild my social circle with people who genuinely cared about me. As for Billy and Mary, I stayed as far away from them as possible. I heard through the grapevine that Billy's wife had kicked him out after reading the journal. Apparently, their marriage had been rocky for years, and this was the final straw. He moved back in with his parents, which felt like poetic justice for a guy who thought he could have it all. Mary, on the other hand, didn't take her eviction as gracefully. She sent me a letter. Yes, an actual handwritten letter, begging for forgiveness. She said she was a different person now, and that she wanted a chance to make things right. She claimed she'd been lost when she cheated on me, and that she'd never loved anyone the way she loved me. I didn't respond. It wasn't about holding a grudge or wanting revenge. I just didn't care anymore. I'd spent too much time and energy on people who didn't deserve it. Responding to her letter, even to tell her off, would have been giving her more attention than she deserved. Years passed, and life moved on. I eventually moved out of the city to take an even better job, leaving behind the last remnants of that chapter of my life. I heard less and less about Mary and Billy as time went on, which was exactly how I wanted it. Then, one day, something unexpected happened. I met someone. Her name was Anna, and she was unlike anyone I'd ever met before. We were introduced through mutual friends, and from the moment we started talking, I felt a connection I hadn't felt in years. She was kind, funny, and down to earth. Everything Mary had pretended to be but never was. At first, I was cautious. I didn't want to rush into anything or let my past experiences cloud my judgment. But Anna was patient with me. She understood that I had baggage and never made me feel bad about it. Over time, I realized that she was the real deal. We started dating, and before long, I knew she was the one. This time, there were no doubts, no red flags, and no hesitation. When I proposed to Anna, it wasn't out of fear of losing her or trying to fix something broken. It was because I genuinely wanted to spend the rest of my life with her. Fast forward to today, Anna and I have been happily married for over 20 years. We've built a life together filled with love, trust, and respect. We have two amazing kids who light up our world, and I couldn't be more grateful for the second chance at happiness I've been given. Looking back, I'm glad I found Mary's journal. It hurt like hell at the time, but it was the wake-up call I needed. If I hadn't found it, I might have spent the rest of my life settling for someone who didn't truly value me. The lesson I learned from all of this is simple. Never ignore the red flags. If something feels wrong, trust your gut. And above all, never let yourself become someone's plan B. As for Mary and Billy, I have no idea where they are now, and I don't care. They're not part of my story anymore, and that's exactly how it should be.